Howdy mates, how are we doing? Here's a part 2 video for March 5th, 2022. Right now we're actually checking out a spot that's known as Mud Bay. Now, as you can tell, it's definitely low tide at the moment, as we are approaching into the afternoon right now. Usually when you go on a trip like this, it's very crucial for you to know the tidal levels in a 24-hour period. Now, Florida typically experiences something called Semidiurnal Tides. Now, some of you may be wondering, like, what does that really refer to? Well, Semidiurnal tide mostly describes 4 separate changes in a period of 24 hours. So like, you'll have a high tide, low tide, and then a high tide again, and then a low tide again. And usually each change in the tidal level, from high to low, is every 6 hours. But of course, that's if the tidal cycles are absolutely perfect. But here's the thing. When it comes to tidal changes, there's always an additional 50 minutes in that 24-hour time span. So what I mean by that is, say you have a high tide at maybe, 6 p.m. on a day. So then the next day, and then 50 minutes later, you'll have high tide exactly as it was before at 6:50 p.m. So it always changes by 24 hours and 50 minutes. So there's a little bit of that in between. So that's usually the typical cycle. And of course, it always has to do with the moon stage. So like, right now, I can't remember exactly what phase of the moon we're in right now. But typically, like, if it's, full moon or new moon, the tidal levels are going to tend to be a lot higher. But when it's, first quarter and last quarter stages of the moon, you're gonna experience a little more neap tide or just lower tide in general. So it also really has to do with the influence of the moon's gravitational pull in addition. So it's quite remarkable how another astronomical body controls what happens on this planet. So that's why, as I mentioned before, going on a trip like this, you really have to know when the tides change. So like Mud Bay, for instance, this is where we're standing right now, it's basically impassable just because of how shallow it is. I mean, it's literally exposing the mud flats. But you give it another, say, towards the evening, or even early in the morning, like 3 in the morning, for instance, this water will be all the way up, and it's passable. So you literally have to be here at a certain time of the day so that there's possibility for you to pass through. But usually when you see tidal flats like this, it's very favorable, especially among our fellow homies, because, in tidal flats like this, you may find separate crabs or worms, you name it, that will have a tendency to become exposed. And so, especially for our wading birds, it's a great opportunity for them to feed. So, that's why this mud that I'm standing on, it's still really, really wet. Just because there isn't enough time for it to dry. You can only imagine what it must be like during the wet season. And you can even see up here along the mud, you can find all kinds of tracks. In addition, I think like some of these tracks where you're seeing like the 3 separate feet, those could be from turkey vultures or black vultures. But that's not the only limitation. You can see white ibis out here. I mean, it's a sheer variety. Wow. And oftentimes, in tidal flats like this, you'll usually smell a lot more sulfur. Just because much of what we're standing in remains anoxic, which is just a fancy term for saying that oxygen is not really present. So that's where you'll start to find other gases. But at the same time, what we're standing in is extremely organic in terms of nutrients. I mean, you have to figure from all of these mangroves, you know, they still shed their leaves, but there's just immediate regrowth. So over time, decomposition happens here. And thus, that's another reason why it's so brown like it is. I mean, this is just decayed plant material and years of it. Sorry, I'm just having to watch my step because my feet really are sinking in. Rest assured, though. Yeah, I'm sinking quite a bit. Okay. So, I think this should about wrap up the video. Alright, you guys, hope you learned something of value regarding tidal flats and what occurs here. And I hope you guys have a great Saturday. So, alright, take care, you guys, and journey on a journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.